Yay, okay. So today we're just gonna do like a 30-minute discussion on the questions. So the first question is, why did Calpio? I can't ever pronounce his name. Why did he choose to incorporate the Hawaiian legend into his story? So if anyone has any insight on that, I'm still thinking.
I think with this one, um, it wasn't really a story that I knew or related to, or like any of the legends. I wasn't familiar with them. But I think that incorporating that into the story made it more interesting, and then also made it so it was a book or a read where I was thinking more often about what I'm doing, like my actions in life, in everyday life. And so, yeah, it really just got me thinking, and it also um, was a little bit interesting to read, a little bit more interesting to read.
Yeah, I think kind of the reason why he incorporated it into the story is because it's such a big part of like Hawaiian culture, is these legends and all of these things. And so I think he just wanted to pull from the actual culture and like, just make it as real as he could. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I like that. I agree. I think that a large part of like the reason that like the legend was included was that just like in the last book that we read, like it made it easier to like relate to the book or like easier to like make connections. The a lot of times, like even though we may not like be able to like personally relate to the legend, there's like a large demographic of people who do. And I also just like as a side note thought it was really cool that like I knew like a lot of the locations that were mentioned in the book. That was pretty cool.
Yeah.
The second question is, how does Hawaiian tradition function in Written in the Sky? I think that it kind of acts as like just like how the dreams, like each chapter kind of like opened with like a dream that Ikao had. Um, the Hawaiian tradition continues to like just push the story forward, like a framing device or like a plot device.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
um, if you have a thought, I
Oh,
could
no.
form a thought, but it didn't really happen.
All right. Well, I was gonna say that I think like incorporating Hawaiian tradition into the stories and like looking back at his the things his grandmother did that were very traditional. I think that kind of helped put this pieces of the story together, and then so you can see the bigger picture. I think incorporating the traditions kind of helped with the overall or the bigger picture of the whole story.
Yeah, I think also is like the homeless population in Hawaii is so much different than like in the mainland. And I think that having that background and kind of knowing like why he was where he was kind of made everybody understand that it's a different situation for the people here than it is anywhere else. And you kind of see like you don't choose this life necessarily or like you know.
I like that a lot. Um, the next question is, what do you think are the audience and purpose of the book? Um, I think that this book, more so than any of the others we've read so far, is like understandable and relatable on like a pretty like large plane, in the sense that like it's a lot more, it's like less of a specific like demographic and more of like anyone who has ever felt like an outsider, or anyone who's ever lost someone, or anyone who's ever like ended up in a place that they would never have imagined because of, you know, like just the way that life is. And so I think the audience is just like more general. And then the purpose, I thought that like one of the most important themes is like the connection between like our dreams and like um, our desires in life. And so kind of helps you find connection between the two, which I thought was really cool.
Yeah, I really like that. I think same, the audience is pretty broad. For me, I kind of thought like as I was reading it, I was like, wow, this is kind of just like, I mean, it's like a super sad book in some parts, but I was like, just kind of like a fun book to read, and you have like the legends and like the dreams and everything. And I felt like when I was reading it, I was getting like the theme of like, don't judge people because you don't know like what's going on. Like it would have been really easy for people on the street to be like, wow, he's just like this runaway kid living on the streets, and in reality, like he was trying to avoid going to foster care. And like the one lady who didn't talk, and then he like talked to her, and she was like, oh my gosh, like where's my family? And like just simply, bless you, like wasn't taking her medication and stuff. So
yeah, I think that's a good like theme from the book, or like that's kind of what I got out of it as well. And I also agree with both. Like the audience is pretty, it's it's pretty broad. I think it's maybe more for people that enjoy learning about different cultures, because I felt like it explored so many different cultures in so many different perspectives. So that was really interesting. And then I also think that the purpose of the book was not only to like help us to realize we shouldn't judge so much, but also like to understand the ripple effect, like everything that we do or that other people do, the choices and actions we make are going to have an effect, and it's just going to ripple. We may not understand in the moment like how we're affecting someone else or how someone else's decision is affecting us, but yeah, in the end, it's, yeah, all our choices are going to affect people. So
The next question is, what societal attitudes, values, or ideals are conveyed or challenged? I think this kind of goes hand in hand with like what we just talked about. Like, I think that there's a lot of, especially here in Hawaii in general, but in the book especially, there's like a lot of like discrimination or like class warfare. Like being in Hawaii, like one of the like most like a very touristy place, but also having to deal with like people who live here just trying to survive. I think that was like that was something I noticed a lot, was like in the way that the author wrote, like when describing like people that the boy like encountered, like how different everyone was. And like something that I noticed was in when the author was like describing those people, the words that he used, like the descriptive words, kind of like helped like differentiate them. I think, I can't remember exactly, but there was like a part where he was like in a store like trying all of the samples, and there was a lady who like, he just said that she kept like looking over at him like, and was like unhappy that he was there, or like was like looked disgusted. And then it also talked about how like just the words used to describe the boy were like more like kind of negative connotation. So I think that one of the biggest like attitudes or like ideals goes hand in hand and is like that don't judge just like at a first glance.
Yeah. I also thought it was really interesting that when Ikao met Hawaiian and Hawaiian was like telling him his story and how he'd been in prison and like he got out and they just shipped him over here. And I thought that was really interesting because in my Hawaiian studies class a couple semesters back, like that and how that's a big problem and like that the mainland just sends their homeless people over here. And so I thought it was really interesting that like that was addressed because not many people know that. They just think that it's like, oh, like people are homeless because it's too expensive to live in Hawaii or, you know, stuff like that. And so I think just like bringing up those things and making it not as like taboo to talk about like the homeless population, I thought that that was really interesting.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. It was interesting to read a book in the perspective of a homeless person to kind of open your eyes to like, wow, these are people that are struggling in life and they have their own struggles and they have their own happiness and they have their own like they're just people. And I feel like with all the labels that we put on them and how we judge them, it affects how they feel about themselves and how we feel about them. So yeah, I thought that was interesting that this, and it made the book different that it was from the perspective of a homeless person, but it also taught so much. And then I also think that it was nice to see kind of how the book was um, trying to show like to spread love. Every time that he got more food than he needed, he would immediately just share it with the other homeless people. And then that the guy in the wheelchair that was dropping the coins for him, he was just trying to spread the love as well. So I think that's kind of something it was teaching.
Like, um, the next question is, in what ways does the author make Hawaiian tradition relevant for contemporary readers? Um, Actually, I don't really know. There were some points like I've lived here for a long time, and there were still some points of the book that I like when they were like speaking pidgin or like just like talking about places or describing like traditions. I had to like go and look it up on my own, um, just because some of it was like not I wasn't familiar with.
Yeah, I kind of felt that way too. There were some things that I just did not get. But I think like very broadly of just I think kind of just making a point of like Hawaiian tradition is not so different from our life now. Like some of the very simple things like family and like the idea of him living with his grandma and how she was to him. But yeah, some of the deeper things I was a little bit confused and was like, I don't know what that is.
I think some of it was a little bit difficult to understand. But I think, like you said, I think the whole family and the grandma that kind of made it relevant to the reader, something you can relate to, and just yeah, I don't know, kind of like what I said before of reading about people spreading the love or reading about people that are being kind to others. I think that goes along with the aloha spirit, and so I think that really emphasized that, and I feel like that's something that a lot of people can relate to or have their eyes open to.
Um, The next question is, this one is like really specific. Like, how does race affect the relationships of characters in the novel? Or like gender or class can affect that as well. And it asks just for specific examples. I have to like pull up my notes. I remember reading, it was super early on in the book, just like when it was talking about like the description of the boy, and he like had like some Hawaiian features and he had some like Caucasian features, but like still like even in school, like his like student or like other students called him like a stupid Howie, and I was like, I'm sure I had more Hawaiian blood in me than any of them. So I think that's just like one small example of how just like interpersonal relationships are really affected by race. And I think especially here in Hawaii, where there's a very like polarized, like you're either local or you're non-local, like your Haui. That's something that I picked up on a lot, just because I feel like living here, I've like not really to an extent, but I've kind of experienced that as well. Like people focus more on race here than anywhere I've ever lived before.
Yeah, for sure. I think kind of going along with the class aspect of it is later on in the book when the teenager comes back to the park and is trying to, kill the homeless people, and they call the police. And the police are like, no, like, you have to get out of here. Like, we're going to arrest you all if you're not out of here within the next hour. I think it was just, like, showed kind of how, like, people in the working class kind of look down on homeless people and are, like, don't really have any, I mean, not everybody, but, like, don't have a sense of humanity of, like, these people don't have a place to sleep. And it was kind of like, we got to get out of here. Like, there's nothing we can do. We don't really care. The law, we're not going to make an exception type of a thing.
Yeah, I think those are both good examples. I wrote down a couple for this question, but I think at the beginning of I think it was at the beginning of the book, where he was trying to be more friendly along the bike path, and he ran into the Japanese tourists, and a couple of them kind of just like, or most of them just ignored him, or like, and then just some other people would like walk to the other side of the bike path. But then when he was teaching the Japanese couple how to say aloha, and then he felt like, oh wow, there's like, it's not everyone that's like that. There's the people that don't judge immediately, and they just are happy to talk to anyone or learn from anyone. So that's kind of one thing that I saw about the race, is like he really tried to put aside like what everyone else says about race or class, and just try to see a person for who they were.
Yeah, I agree. I think Ikao is like a really good example of like just like the aloha spirit and like not caring as much about like gender, race, or like class or culture or anything like that. So that brings us, sorry, my husband's like running around doing stuff in the background, but the last question is like, when did two or more of the above factors come together to influence the way a character is treated or interacts with the world? If any of you guys want to go first, I
don't know if mine, like, I feel like it did mention race a lot, but I felt like it was more focused on labels more than race. So I think like kind of how these things came together, a good example is with Hawaiian, and how, like you said, he was an ex-convict, and he he just was like, he was homeless, and so that didn't help the case either. But like, he was actually this really nice guy who was really wise and had a lot to share with the world, but like no one ever gave him that chance. No one really wanted to interact with him. But when Mikao did that, he realized how how great this guy was, and just because he was an ex-convict and homeless, like that didn't define him. Those weren't the labels that should have defined him. He's actually really knowledgeable and really kind. You know, he was really trying to change his ways, especially after experiencing being in prison and whatnot. So I think just that, like those labels and how those shouldn't have been the main focus about Hawaiian.
Yeah, I think that's really good. I also think that we were kind of talking about earlier how Ika was kind of made fun of in school for maybe not being like full Hawaiian. I think that goes along with kind of like the Hawaiian traditions, and that like kind of just virtually known that you make fun of Hawaii people and they're kind of like not liked. And so I think those those two things, like the relationship he had with people and like the way people view Howie's, it came together, and like we could see that, like we keep coming back to, like he wasn't treated as well as he should have been treated for like what he was doing for people and how he was treating people.
I think another example could be Tristan, that girl he met that like, gave him. She was like, she kind of acted like a confidant in the sense that like she treated Ika like a normal person, like even though she appeared to be, you know, like a higher, I guess like a higher social class. Like she wasn't homeless, obviously, and but she like gave him empowerment, and he like went on and like sat in that lecture course at UH and stuff. I thought that was really interesting. That like just by like I don't know, like acknowledging that he was a person, like a human, not treating him how everyone else was. I think that was a big turning point in the book, like when he kind of like changed his attitude and became more like independent and self-aware. I thought that was all right. Well, that was the end of the questions. Does anyone else have anything they want to add before?
Mm-hmm.
Everything. All right. Well, I'll write up the paper and then submit it tonight.
All right.
Great. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.